Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth, the Education Coordinator for Marlene's Market and Deli. We are recording live here from the Tacoma store location. We are very grateful for our presenter tonight, and just want to let you know, sign up for your Marlene's Sound Outlook newsletter where you get to know about monthly sales, articles, recipes, and of course, wonderful classes. And I hope you sign up, and then you can stay in touch with everything Marlene's. The rest of the week is all about um, children's health, and tonight's class is sleep solutions for the kiddos. And we have our very lovely presenter, Jade Folk, to teach you tonight. So let's give her a virtual round of applause.
Clapping for myself. Okay. Yes, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Okay. So, yeah, does that still look good? Perfect. All right. Well, yeah. Thanks so much for coming, everyone. This is Sleep Solutions for Infants, Toddlers, and Young Children. So a little bit about me. My name is Jade Folk. I am a certified pediatric sleep coach. And what I do is I provide guidance and support and education, advice, and science-backed sleep advice and implementation services. So implementation services is basically science-backed sleep methods. My background is in attachment-based sleep methods. I studied attachment theory and polyvagal theory. Attachment theory being the bond between child and caregiver, and polyvagal theory is all about the nervous system and how it regulates emotions and social connections and fear responses. But I'll get into that a little bit later. And yeah, on top of being a sleep coach, I'm also a certified positive discipline parent educator. If you don't know what positive discipline is, it is awesome. It is just such a great way to teach life skills without using punishment and without being permissive and without rewards. And it's all about mutual respect as well. So yeah, and then a little bit more about me and my background. So I was telling some of the folks here that I started out as a nanny and a preschool teacher. And every time I worked with kids, I was always following the lead of the parents, right? And how they told me to get their babies to sleep. And so I've tried everything. And I, have just learned so much about sleep along the way. And mostly I've just learned that people don't know how to achieve it, really. So that's just been a struggle for all the families, mostly that I've worked with. And I have an 18-month-old at home who's an awesome sleeper. That being said, sleep is just, it can be tricky, and even we have sleepless nights too. So I'll get into that a little bit, but it's just a very complicated science, right? But that is what I'm here to teach you about. So here's just a little bit about what we're going to be talking about. I'm just going to quickly touch on co-sleeping and cry it out, and then the science of sleep, sleep safety, age-appropriate sleep needs, some sleep tips and common sleep challenges, calming routines and how to cultivate them, some parent self-care, and then we'll have a little time for questions at the end. So starting off with co-sleeping. So I'm super passionate about talking about co-sleeping because it's very common that people co-sleep. But here in the US, there's so much shame around co-sleeping, right? And it's coming from a good place. It's coming from people being concerned about children and about the risk of SIDS. But what happens in turn is that there's so much shame around it that we end up not educating people on how to do it safely if they feel like they're going to do it or have to do it. And so because of that, people who choose to co-sleep, they're not telling their pediatricians, and most of them are just lying to their pediatricians, which is scary, and that's for good reason, because the pediatrician wouldn't give them advice on how to do it safely. They would just tell them to stop, right? And so that just creates this culture of lack of education and support for people who co-sleep. And when you look at the studies and statistics for the SIDS risk and the SIDS rates. In the US, it's the highest. And in places like Japan, where co-sleeping is a cultural norm, it's the lowest. And so to me, that tells me that it's more about the education. You know, there's danger in not educating people. And so I believe as a sleep coach, it's my responsibility to educate families and educate people about the risks and safety, and so that they can make informed choices and how to mitigate their own risks and make sure it's safe for them to do it. And yeah, so I believe that's my responsibility. Most pediatric sleep coaches here in the US, they don't help people who are co-sleeping. They just say, we'll help you to stop co-sleeping. And I just think there is an issue with that. And it's, yeah, I'm super passionate about it. And there's a lot of different reasons why people choose to co-sleep. A lot of people choose to do it for that closeness and bonding, and those attachment needs, right? And I believe that there are other ways to get those attachment needs that aren't co-sleeping. But that's just the route that some people choose, which is co-sleeping. And for a cultural upbringing, right, solitary sleep is relatively recent. It's 1950s is when it became more recent, and became more of the cultural norm here in the US. Yeah, just people's upbringings and learning that that's how you get babies to sleep. And then night feedings, people who are chest feeding, that's really difficult to get up multiple times in the night, especially early on. And so sometimes people will choose to co-sleep for that reason. And then also the majority of people who I learn co-sleep are choosing it out of desperation. So they don't know how else to get their baby to sleep. And so they do this. And being in an environment and in a culture where it's not talked about, they're not telling maybe their family, they're not telling their pediatrician, so they might not be doing it in the safest way possible. So that's what I'm trying to spread the word about with co-sleeping, is that while I don't advise or recommend co-sleeping for any of the clients that I work with, I won't ask them to co-sleep just because of the American Association of Pediatrics. I will help people who co-sleep to achieve better sleep, and to also make sure that they're doing it in a safe way. Yeah, but if you're doing it on your own, what I would recommend is heavily researching the Safe 7. So that's safety guidelines around co-sleeping. So that's going to be things like making sure it's a safe environment as far as the bed goes. So not sleeping in between two caregivers, and smoke-free environment, no alcohol or drug use. And yeah, there's a lot of information on that. And also just knowing your baby and yourself. And me personally, I just knew that I didn't feel safe co-sleeping because I have a Chihuahua who I would roll over constantly on, who sleeps in bed with us. And that was scary to me. So I was like, I'm not going to do it at home with my baby. And I know some people feel really confident and safe co-sleeping, and some people don't. And so it's really about just knowing yourself and knowing if it feels safe for you to do it. And then also, there's just a lot of different information out there of like, oh, if you co-sleep, your baby sleep better. If you co-sleep, your baby sleep worse. And I'm just here to say that it depends on your baby. So some babies, I know I kind of toss and turn all night. When my baby was sleeping in the same room as us, everybody was waking each other up all night because we were room sharing, which is different than bed sharing. And yeah, so we were just waking each other up all night through just tossing and turning. And then some people sleep really restfully and soundly, and they sleep better co-sleeping. So there's no better or worse as far as restfulness goes. It's just depending on your individual people in your family. Okay, and then I'm just going to touch on the cry it out method, because this is the most commonly used method for sleep training. And because I'm attachment and research based, I don't use this method. And there's a couple different reasons why. So I mostly don't use it because of those attachment needs. And the research behind it is really limited and lacking. Unfortunately, oh, and if you don't know what cry it out is, I should explain it. It's essentially leaving your baby, sometimes for small intervals, then for longer intervals, until you just leave your baby in their room to cry on their own. And so that is, yeah, what most people use, as far as, and what most people think of when they think of sleep coaching and sleep training is this method. And so the reason that parents choose cry it out is because that's what their pediatricians tell them to do. They say, let your baby cry, it's good for them. The positive and the positive reviews that the community says of, oh, I did cry it out, or maybe you know, a mother-in-law or a grandparent, not you. I don't know, but not to call you out, but yeah, so people say, well, oh, you just let them cry for a little while and it's good for them, right? And I'm going to touch on that a little bit of just kind of the misleading reviews about it and why they can be misleading. But also people will choose it out of just lack of support, fear of sleep deprivation, because I get it. I totally get why people choose cry it out, because it's scary to be that sleep deprived, and it can be, you feel like that's dangerous and you want your child to get the sleep that they need. So I totally get why people turn to cry it out. And the promise of quick results. People say that you just let them cry for a short period of time and then they can sleep well for the rest of their life. And misinformation about that it's healthy for your baby, right? The misguided information where sleep is healthy for your baby, but it's important to the way that they get sleep is important, and the way that they're learning to sleep is important. And I'll touch on that a little bit too with the possible impacts and implications. And this idea of self-soothing, that babies need to learn to self-soothe, that's something I hear a lot. And I always say that I like to teach babies to self-settle, because so many times babies don't know how to self-soothe. But we can teach them to settle themselves. But if there's something really wrong, if they're crying a lot, they can't soothe themselves from that. So self-settling and going in to soothe them, because we're their caregivers and it's our job to soothe them, right? And then also, because it's something I hear so much, is just that it's believed to be thoroughly researched and research backed. But when you look at the research is really, really lacking. And yeah, there's no research on long-term effects. I won't get too much into the research, but because it's kind of complicated, but it was just kind of 2 study groups, one study group doing cry it out, one doing other methods. And it wasn't being monitored by the researchers. So it was just based on their reporting back. And so that's kind of the methodological flaws in the study. So it was just kind of there's not very much research, and also there's a huge body of research and literature on attachment and psychological literature on related things, and the studies from the cry it out method. Those studies were contradictory to those already really well established research. So it's just not enough research for me to feel confident supporting it and advising the use of it. And then a couple other reasons that people don't talk about so much. Oh, there's a loud car. I hope you can all hear. But the possible impacts and implications. So there's so many things that go into sleep. So many key factors of sleep that go into it. And just putting a baby down to cry is ignoring all of those factors, right? There's so many things that we need even as adults to get ourselves ready for sleep. And we can't just expect to, some people can just get right into bed and fall asleep, but that's not everybody, and especially not young babies. So we're ignoring those and just trying to get right to sleep. So this is the dorsal collapse. So going back on my polyvagal theory education, so dorsal collapse is the way that the brain kind of disassociates and disengages out of that fear response when it's triggered, and out of this necessity of survival mode and going into survival mode. So many people think that, oh, if my baby is crying for 45 minutes and then suddenly stops crying, that they've accepted that nobody's coming, and they've accepted that it's time to go to sleep. And there's just not any research on if it is that they're just accepting that it's time to sleep, or if it's actually that they're going into a dorsal dive and disengaging, and it's associated with extreme stress and trauma response. And so there haven't been studies where a baby's brain is hooked up so they can see and look for that. And so there's this idea that, oh, they've stopped crying, that they're fine and they're going to sleep. And they might actually just be exhausted. And it just breaks my heart to think about it. But yeah, so there's just not enough information about that. And then I also just think something that people don't talk a lot about with babies is the parents and the parents' mental health. I found that a lot. Through most of my clients, and through my own experience having a baby, we don't really talk about like what it's like for the parents. And so the cry it out response is really hard for the parents. And some people are able to do it, and that's not a judgment to them. That might be that they have more support in their lives, and they have they're more set up for success with that. Or maybe they have a baby who only did cry for like a couple minutes and went to sleep and accepted it. We don't know. But just most of the parents who come to me, they've already tried cry it out, and they said it was not for me, and it was really devastating and hard. That emotional distress of the parents, I think is something to think about. And also the concept of training your brain to kind of disengage when your baby is crying. And your brain can't, differentiate between a nighttime, when they're crying in distress, and then when we get to daytime and they're crying in distress. Our brains aren't, built to differentiate that disassociation and to be engaged and supportive during those times, but at nighttime not. So we're kind of just teaching our brains to disengage and disassociate from their child's distress, right? So I think that can have long-term impacts for both the child and the parent as well. And then the last thing I'll touch on about this is the regression effect. So that's what I was talking about with the promise of quick results, right? And the misinformation, misleading reviews. So the regression effect is the way that we teach our baby to sleep is how they learn to sleep. And when they go through a sleep regression, we oftentimes have to reteach them in the ways that we taught them how to sleep, if that makes sense. So if you teach your baby to sleep by rocking them to sleep, and they go through a regression, we're going to have to keep doing that. So if you do the cry it out method, every time there's a regression, you're going to have to do the cry it out method every time there's a regression. So that can be 4 months you're doing cry it out, at 6 months, anytime between 8 and 10 months, 12 months, 15 months through 18 months, and 2 years, and even 3 years old. So there's a lot of different regressions, and regression is actually a progression of your brain, right? So it's a regression of sleep, but it actually means that your baby is learning something and going through a new development. And so regressions are awesome because it means your baby is developing well and learning things. But that also means that a regression can happen at any time. So I had one client whose baby learned a new song, and that put her into a regression where she was up in the middle of the night at all hours of the night, singing this song, and that caused a regression. So regressions can happen at any time. So it's just thinking about how you want to teach your baby to sleep. And that's just something that I don't hear people talking about, is the possibility. It's not concrete that will happen, but I've seen that happen, and that can happen where every time there's a regression, they have to resort back to cry it out. Which, just thinking about all of the impacts, especially on the parents and the caregivers going through that so many times, and the babies as well, it's just it's a lot. So that's my spiel about Cry It Out. I love to talk about Cry It Out because it is the most commonly used method, and most people don't know any of this information about it. And so I just like to give people information so they can choose what's best for their family. And I also want to say that I don't think crying is necessarily a bad thing. I think that it's a normal and natural response to change, right? And so I just like to implement ways that the baby or child feels supported through those, and is getting the support that they need, and able to cry, and but also, yeah, feeling supported. And if they're left to cry on their own, they might not be feeling supported. So yeah, that's my little spiel on Cry It Out. And then I use a lot of different methods. I feel like there's a lot of methods that can and have created the same results as Cry It Out, and better in my opinion, because of those things like the regression effect and things like that. So yeah, you can have sleep success without doing Cry It Out, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so now I'm just going to touch quickly on the sleep science, because this is something that I'm super passionate about as well. So I hope you guys, oh yeah, okay, you can see my little what's it called? My little arrow here. So sleep cycles. So sleep cycles are, for infants, it's 45 minutes, and toddlers 60 minutes, and adults 90 minutes, and young children 90 minutes as well. And but every baby is a little bit different, so it might not be those exact times. But yeah, a sleep cycle, something that I see a lot is babies not connecting their sleep cycles. So if you see a baby, or you know a baby, or you have a baby who is taking short naps, like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, that means that they might not be connecting their sleep cycles, and they're just going through one sleep cycle, and instead of multiple sleep cycles. And so if you see that like 45-minute mark, that means that they might not know how to self-settle and get themselves back to sleep, which I'll touch on in my tips as well. And yeah, so something cool about, so I have this little chart here that shows the sleep cycles. So this is through a night. And so this is for an infant. And when you look at it, you see, okay, so at the bottom here, this is the deep sleep. That's the non-REM cycle. And so that's when they're in a really deep restorative sleep, and that is associated with brain development, body development, growth. It's really good stuff. And then up here is the lighter sleep. So that's when they're in the rapid eye movement. They're in the kind of lighter sleep, and they're shifting more. They might make some sounds. And then up here is awake. And you can see throughout the night, all of these times that it shows that they're waking up. So this concept of sleeping through the night, right, that we all talk about, of like, is your baby sleeping through the night? When can my baby sleep through the night? Nobody, even adults, are sleeping through the night. Nobody's in a deep sleep all night long, right? They're all waking up, including you, waking up at these different intervals. But we know how to get back to sleep usually. And sometimes we can't, right? Sometimes we wake up at a random time at night and can't get back to sleep. And that's babies too. Maybe more often than us adults. But yeah, so all those times that they're awake, it's all about how they know how to put themselves to sleep, how they know how to get to sleep. So that's when I advise teaching self-settling methods, because if your baby is rocked to sleep, or shushed to sleep, or nursed to sleep, things like that, all of these times where they're waking up, that's what they're going to need, right? To get back to sleep. And yeah. And then, and then I'll touch on the suprachiasmatic nucleus. I love saying that word. It makes me feel like a scientist. So that is just the internal body clock. So that is what regulates our circadian rhythm. So that is the light-dark cycle. And so what's important about this is that it produces the melatonin production, as well as the cortisol production. And so something that's just important about that is just thinking about the light and how it impacts sleep. So there's been some really cool studies based on just different lights and how that impacts sleep. So red light does not suppress melatonin, but blue light does suppress melatonin. So things like screens and even like bright overhead lights or lights in your house, that can really affect that melatonin production, and then also supplies us with some cortisol too, which is the stress hormone, which doesn't necessarily mean that we're stressed, but it just means that we're awake. So yeah, just when you see babies who are it's called reverse cycling, when they're up at night and asleep during the day, that means that they need more development to regulate their circadian rhythm. That means their circadian rhythm is not developed, and that develops around 3 months. So yeah, so that's just a little bit about the sleep science. I just love that, but I just love that chart. That's the biggest takeaway, I think, for me, is just thinking about all of those awake times and how your baby goes to sleep. And yeah, and I'll talk a little more about melatonin and cortisol as well. Okay, so this is just the AAPs, the American Association of Pediatrics. This is what they advise for safe sleep. So they advise, it's called the ABCs. They advise alone, on the back, in a crib. And so I there's not a lot, they're not very descriptive, which is hard. So like they say, keep the room cool to prevent overheating, but they don't tell you how cool and what signs of overheating, things like that. So that's something that I do a lot of education on as well. The room temperature should be 68 to 72, but also in a lot of places that's not realistic. So it's all about how to dress your baby and dressing in lighter things. And yeah, they say not to sleep in the same bed as baby. So that's the American Association of Pediatrics, that we talked about, like not advising that for, not advising co-sleeping. And then let's see, they say keep the room smoke-free, which is true. And then the safest place for baby to sleep is in the same room as their caregiver. It used to be 6 months that they advise that movement from in the room with, whoops, in the room with your baby, sleeping with the parents in the same room, not the same bed. It used to be 6 months, and then they just changed it recently to 12 months. So they're advising you to sleep in the same room with your baby until your baby is a year old, which there's not a lot of research on why they do that, but that's just what they recommend as a preventative for SIDS risk. And it's not what most people do. And I found that I slept better when my baby moved to a different room, right? Because we were just waking each other up constantly. We moved at 9 months, and it was the best decision for our family. So I always just say, what works for your family? And yeah, placing babies on their back. And that was a big decrease in the SIDS rates, went down in the 90s when they changed that from tummy sleepers to back sleepers. But some babies learn to roll over early, and if they can roll over, that's totally fine. You don't have to keep turning them back over. If they can do it on their own, that's safe. And then, yeah, preventing the flat head by changing sides. Once baby starts rolling, yeah, oh, that's what they say, yeah, to sleep on their tummy, that's totally fine. And then a crib that meets safety standards. They talk about the crib, the loose bedding. So that one is really important to me. The loose bedding, so that means like blankets, like not putting blankets on a baby under 12 months old. However, there's also risk in loose fitted sheets around the mattress. And so making sure those are really tight around the corners so they can't slip off and cause a risk of suffocation. And then, yeah, avoiding bumpers and toys and stuffed animals. And that's all until 12 months old. And then avoid sleep positioning devices like bumpers. And yeah, so that's the American Associations of Pediatrics of Safe Sleep. That's what they recommend. And Yeah, and this is just a quick chart about the sleep needs by age. So this is 0 to 3 months. So this is in a 24-hour period. This is how much sleep they need, 14 to 17 hours. And then they have 3 to 5 naps per day. And then as we go, I just wanted to get this in case anybody needed to write this down. As we go, yeah, around 4 or 5 months, that's when you start dropping some naps and you're maybe not at the 5 naps anymore, because by 6 months we should be down to about 3 naps a day. And that can be a gradual. Some days your baby might take more naps, some days they might take less naps. They might take cat naps, which is just a quick 30-minute nap at the end of the day. And then by 10 to 12 months, that's when we drop down to 2 naps. And I really don't advise dropping that second nap until 14 to 16 months, which is tricky because some babies go to daycare, and oftentimes daycare will say that their baby needs to be just doing 1 nap at 12 months, the daycare age. So so that can be tricky for some people. And so I work with a lot of people who are trying to figure out what to do with that. I always advise people to talk to their daycare or preschool to ask if there's any wiggle room for their baby to get in a second nap if needed. But yeah, so I don't advise that dropping of the nap. Sometimes you don't even see it until 18 months. Even 24 months sometimes. Yeah, there have been kids. It just depends on your individual child and their sleep needs. And so then by around 2 years, they probably are down to 1 nap. And then I don't advise the final nap drop until about 3 years. And there are some cases where babies are 2.5 who do drop a nap and or drop their last nap and are totally fine. But that's not the majority. I usually see that they need that last nap, even up until 5 years old. And something that I see a lot is that there is a 2-year regression, right? There's like an 18-month as well regression and 2-year regression. And some people take that as that their baby is trying to drop their last nap. And what I say is if they are consistently refusing and not napping for a solid 2 weeks in a row consecutively, then that's when I say it's time to drop that last nap. But we want to see that 2-week mark because sometimes they're just going through a regression, and regressions take 2 weeks long to get through. So yeah, I say just try to hold it out for 2 weeks and see if they're actually ready to drop that nap or if they're just going through a regression and they still need that sleep. Because I see a lot of sleepy 2-year-olds at the playground, just exhausted. Okay, so these are wake windows. So wake windows are just awesome way to track sleep and to see how much sleep your baby might need. They, again, are just a rough estimate. It's not, it's just the majority of babies have these wake windows. Are you able to see that screen okay? Can you see that? Okay. And so a lot of people are kind of confused about when the wake window starts and ends. So as soon as your baby wakes up to the time they're back asleep, that's the end of the wake window, not when they're in their crib. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah, totally. Okay, so swaddling, you usually stop at anytime the baby starts rolling or showing signs of rolling. That's when you want to stop swaddling, because then they have that risk of rolling over and not being able to push themselves back up with their arms because their arms are swaddled, right? So if there's any signs of rolling, you want to stop the swaddling. So rolling, that developmental stage usually happens at around 4 months. But that's okay. But I've seen babies start rolling at 2 months as well. So you really have to look out for those signs. Swaddling can be really, really cool. It's a really awesome resource and way for your baby to sleep because it is more similar to the womb. So it's really great for those, brand new babies to the world, newborns, that's what they're called, brand new babies. So so swaddling helps them feel more contained. Even if they're crying when you're putting on the swaddle, once they get the swaddle in, that can be just a signal to their brain that they're safe and they're comfy. Oh, I just touched the microphone. I think I was touching it a lot. I forgot it was there. Hopefully that wasn't too disruptive. And yeah, sleep sacks. So I love sleep sacks. So yeah, so once your baby starts rolling, and if they haven't shown signs of rolling by 4 months, talk to your pediatrician, but also discontinue the sleep sack regardless. Not sleep sacks, sorry, swaddles should be stopped at 4 months, even if your baby's not rolling yet. So at the age of rolling or 4 months. And then sleep sacks, yeah, sleep sacks, they're awesome. They are just kind of the next phase. Some people choose to not do swaddling and just go straight to sleep sacks, which is fine too. You just want to make sure that they fit correctly. You want to make sure that the armholes are not too big and that it's the right size for your baby, armhole and neck hole, so they can't get their arms stuck inside of the sleep sack. And yeah, you want to look at the TOG as well. That's the temperature gauge for the sleep sack. So I believe I'm not remembering right now. I think it's like 0.5. It's like a warmer. Yeah, it should tell you on there. Yeah, it's called TOG. But that is just, if you have a warmer house, then you want to do a lighter sleep sack. Wintertime, you'll do a little thicker sleep sack. Or if you have consistent heat. If you don't live in an old house like me, then you don't have to worry about it, and you can keep the same sleep sack, and AC, things like that. Yeah, so I hope that answered all the questions. Yeah, so safety, yeah, good. Okay, yeah, safety with sleep sacks. Yeah, they can still be, as long as they fit properly and are snug fit around the neck and the arms, they can be used instead of swaddles as well. But I think swaddles are great. Harvey Karp's 5S's is really cool for that early stage. He's a pediatrician who is all about he calls it the fourth trimester of when the baby is born, they're still just very womb-like, and they kind of need that environment. So something that helped us a lot was vacuuming in those first early weeks, because it sounded like the womb. The vacuum, the hair dryer, the swaddling, the sucking, and the swinging motion, those are his 5S's. And so yeah, but that's just a little side tip. Yeah, I hope that addressed that. And then, okay, so these are the most common sleep challenges and tips that I see. So regressions, like we already talked about, regressions, which are actually progressions, right? They last about 2 weeks. And so if a regression is going longer, I see some people who are like, oh, my baby has been going through a regression for 3 weeks, 4 weeks. That to me tells me it's not a regression anymore. It's actually a newly developed habit. So watching for that 2-week mark, they should only last for 2 weeks. And if it's beyond that, then it's something else. It's something new. And that happens because we're not consistent usually when there is a regression. So our baby will be sleeping fine, right? And then suddenly they go through a regression, and then we start doing different things. We start offering them milk or more comfort, which is totally fine. But we might be introducing some new habits and some new sleep associations. So if your baby was fine, not going to sleep without milk every time they wake up, and then they go through a regression, and then they get milk every time they wake up, then that's going to turn into a habit, right? And so yeah, just watching for that 2-week mark and trying to keep your routines and your responses as consistent as possible is what I recommend. So keeping that consistency so they're not developing new habits. You can, if your response is to go in and soothe them, you can do that more. If they're, waking up more, you can do that more. But there's just consistency in responses and how you respond to your baby, and trying not to add in a bunch of new things. And then regressions for older toddler and kids. So that 2-year regression, that's that developmentally appropriate regression where they're going through a developmental leap, right? But sometimes when we see that in older kids, like a regression of maybe potty training or a regression with the way that they're responding, like having a regression of some other sort that might be more to do with a big life event. They might be having a new sibling come, or they've moved, or something big is happening in their life, and that can cause regressions as well. But you should usually see that in older kids, but sometimes in littler babies as well. Take a sip of water. So night wakings, that is another thing that I get the most questions about. So night wakings, so babies, according to the American Association of Pediatrics, 6 months is when a full-term baby can go without milk in the night, right? They can go without night feedings. But that's really dependent on each family and every kid. I feel like 6 months sometimes feels a little early. I like to do kind of like a slower wean for that. And so the night wakes, if your baby is still drinking milk in the night, obviously they're going to happen, and we can't do anything about them, or we can't do much about them happening if they need to eat, if they need that nutrition, right? And those calories. Something I recommend through that weaning phase is to make sure they're getting appropriate calories throughout the day. That's like the introduction of solid foods as well as milk, giving them a little more milk in the day so they can have a little less at night, that kind of thing, and just kind of doing a more gradual approach. And then I call this my nighttime mode. So even when they are waking in the night and we have to go in for a feeding or a diaper change, I recommend trying to keep it its own thing. So it's a nighttime mode where I know I touched on the red light and how that impacts sleep. So that doesn't suppress melatonin. If we're going in and we're turning on an overhead light or even a bright white light, that can really impact that baby's ability to go back to sleep. We want it to feel as sleepy and restful as possible. We want to be using hushed voices and quiet, kind of whispering voices, not saying too many things and giving them too many ideas in their head to think about. So yeah, just keeping it really simple, really quiet. I recommend that that nighttime lighting, and if you can't do a red light, just a very dim light, just trying not to have it too bright, can be helpful. And then sound machines. So keeping the sound machine on. I love sound machines. They're just great. They're a super great resource for just families who have maybe a lot of noise in their house or other kids. And also just as a sleep association, I recommend it even if we have a quiet house. It can just help kind of signal to the brain that it's time to go to sleep if they hear that sound. And a sleep phrase, I always recommend a little sleep phrase, so that something like it's nighttime, I love you, something simple, something that you say consistently as a way to signal to their brain that it's nighttime. And that it's not time to wake up, right? I think that's super helpful for toddlers, especially toddlers who, because once they get you, if they get you in a conversation, then you're hooked and you can't get out of it. So just trying to keep your responses as consistent as possible, not getting hooked in conversations, not answering questions, things like that. So keeping a sleep phrase so that they know what to expect and they know you're not going to give them anything else. During that nighttime, and then it's time to go back to sleep, right? But for younger babies, it's all about the environment to signal to them that it's nighttime and it's not awake time, right? And then sleep association. So there's positive and negative ones, right? And not necessarily negative, but they can impact you in a negative way. So that would be things like just thinking about the association that your baby needs to go to sleep, right? Whether that be rocking. I always advise, especially if we can get it early on, to really practice putting baby in the crib while they're still awake and drowsy, which doesn't work for every baby, but it works for a lot to just start to learn those ways to kind of soothe on their own. And then definitely if they cried, pick them up and try again. I had one client who I worked with who I helped them change their sleep association, and their sleep association that they brought to me with was that they told me that their baby only slept through watching live concerts on the television. which is hilarious to me that it's like, oh, this is the only way my baby sleeps, which I'm like, that baby didn't know about that. That's something that the parents implemented, right? And they found that it worked, and then it became a habit. So thinking about the things that you're putting in as the parent, as the caregiver, what you're teaching your baby that they need to go to sleep, right? I loved that. I thought that was so funny. And then learning your baby's cues, learning those sleepy cues. So crying is the last cue that the baby signals when they're tired. So there's tons of cues before that, right? They get red eyebrows, they might start disengaging, zoning out, things like that. So it's just learning your baby's individual sleep cues and kind of learning that. And it's super helpful to watch those wake windows as well, so that when they're kind of nearing the end of their wake window, you can see what cues they have and are presenting to you, so that you know next time that, oh, when they do this, that means they're starting to get tired, if they get kind of cranky, or if they get hungry, things like that. So yeah. And then short naps, that's something that I see a lot, that I touched on already a little bit. But short naps usually mean that the baby, it usually means they're undertired or overtired. So it's really looking at those wake windows and the sleep needs, and making sure that they're getting enough sleep. But yeah, I always say, I have it down at the end for early rising is sleep begets sleep, right? So if your baby takes a short nap, or if your baby has a lot of trouble in the night and isn't sleeping well in the night, then that next day you can expect that they might not sleep very well for their nap as well. So they kind of need that sleep to be restored in order to continue having restful sleep. It's kind of counterintuitive almost. But yeah, the less sleep they get, the less sleep they will continue to get. So really trying to stop that overtired cycle. And short naps also, I know I touched on this, of the wake or the sleep cycle. So if your baby is just sleeping for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, they're just probably not connecting their sleep cycles. So they just need a little practice connecting their sleep cycles. And one more thing, I'll go back really quick to this. If they're, sometimes when we're at this mode, when they're in the light sleep, and they're making some noise, sometimes they'll fuss a little bit, they'll make a little noise. Parents a lot of time will think that they're at this phase, they're awake, and that they need something, they are hungry, they need a diaper change, and so they'll go in when the baby is still asleep and actually wake them up. So I always recommend just pausing for just a couple minutes, just to listen to see what your baby is actually telling you. Are they actually getting up, or are they just resettling? So they might be, so the parents might be teaching them not to self-settle, right, by going in at every sound. So if it's not a sound of distress, or if it's just some slight, I think it's called whinging, just like some little crying sounds, but not full crying, they might just be kind of waking up and they're like a little bit groggy, and they're like, oh, okay, back to sleep. So just try to see what your baby is, if they're actually awake, or yeah. And then, yeah, short naps, lighting, how we talked about that melatonin suppression. So if the room is really bright, that might wake them up more, and that might mean that they'll take a shorter nap, right? Thinking about the noise level, that's why I recommend the sound machines. Looking at the wake windows, making sure that they're not overtired or undertired. That can help kind of suss out why their naps are short. Like maybe they're just yeah, overtired or undertired. So looking for that and following those wake windows. And then, yeah, looking at your sleep associations. Like I said before, if the baby is rocked to sleep, then at the end of their sleep cycle, they might need to be rocked to sleep again. And sometimes that just wakes them up too much, where they just take short naps, because that's the association they have to go to sleep. And it can sometimes be stimulating for them, right? And so they can take short naps because of that as well. Yeah, so I'm breezing through this, but we'll have some time for questions too. And false start, so that's when I see this a lot, where people will say, oh, my baby goes to bed just fine at 7 p.m., but then at 9 p.m. wakes up crying. And so that's called a false start, and that is almost always because they're overtired. So you see it in the first few hours of sleep. that they will just kind of like re-wake up. And if it's nothing else, like if they're not hungry, if there's not a noise in the house that wakes them up, if it's not something with the lighting, then it definitely could be just a signal that they're overtired and they maybe need some more sleep. So just settle them and then work on sleep the next day, getting a little more sleep. And yeah, so let's see. And then, oh yeah, I always recommend a 7 to 8 p.m. bedtime for almost everybody. However, I will say for overtired babies, it's totally fine to put them to bed at 6 too, as long as they have all their needs met. A 6 p.m. bedtime is totally fine. And some people worry that if they put a overtired baby to sleep at 6 p.m., then they're going to wake up earlier in the morning. And that's not the case. Oftentimes, you might even see the opposite, where they might sleep in more because they're getting that restorative sleep and connecting their sleep cycles a little bit better. So I recommend, between 6 and 8 p.m., usually 7 and 8 p.m. So that's when that melatonin is released naturally in our brain, 7 p.m. For most babies and kids. And then the cortisol release happens. I see this so much where they say, oh, my baby doesn't get tired until 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m. And before that, they're just crazy. They're just running around the house, just wild. And so to me, that tells me that we actually missed our melatonin window at 7 p.m., between 7 and 8 p.m. And then they got a cortisol release, second wind, and then it ramped them back up, and then they were crazy until 11 p.m., and then they could go to sleep. And then that gets them into an overtired cycle, right? And so we're probably missing those tired cues earlier on, so just aiming to push everything up a little bit for sleep, for bedtime. And then bath time, this is another thing that I love to talk about, where people, because us as adults, we love baths and we associate them with this really peaceful, calm, soothing environment for us. For babies, it's crazy. It's like so stimulating. Yeah, exactly. It's super stimulating. That's another thing about sleep is that talking about the temperature of body sleep, we want the temperature of body sleep to drop to be able to get to that sleep state, that sleepy state for babies. So if we think about putting them into, that's how you get into deep sleep, is dropping that body temperature. So if you're putting them into a warm bath, that's raising their body temperature, waking them up more. It's stimulating. Yeah, exactly. They have tons of toys usually. So it's like this, just splashing. It's a stimulating, crazy, fun playtime is how they view it, right? So I always recommend not doing bedtime or not doing bath time right before bedtime. I recommend at least 45 minutes before bedtime starts, before your bedtime routine starts. That's the wind down period. And how are we doing on time here? Okay. So that's what I call it, baby zoomies. That's what I always, when I was a nanny, and I would give the kids a bath before bed, and then they just run around the house naked for what seemed like hours, and they were just like wild, chaotic. That was just the baby zoomies, running around. So push that bath time up if you can. I know that's hard for some people to push it up because of work and dinner time as well, right? But you can also not do bath time every night too. You can kind of space it out every other day, every 2 days, depending on your lifestyle. So, and then early rising is another thing that I just see all the time. Early rising, and that can be from overtiredness as well. I always try to ask the parents, like, okay, you wake up at that time. Is there something? I had one client who there was a bird out the window where they were like, my baby just keeps waking up at 5:30 every morning. And I asked them to listen, and they found out there was a bird who nested outside the window. And I didn't really have advice for how to help that, other than, I couldn't advise them how to change their bird situation. Maybe put feeders somewhere else or something to move the bird, try to encourage the bird to nest somewhere else. But I am not supporting to mess with wildlife as well. So, so just listening to the sound. If there's sound outside, if people are starting their engines for work and it's really loud. So thinking about how to mitigate that, thinking about sound machines, things like that. And then, here we go. And light as well. I see those early wakes oftentimes because that light is pouring in and it's signaling to the baby's brain that it's time to get up and it's time to be awake. And yeah, so I always recommend like some blackout curtains. I think those are awesome. There's a lot of different inexpensive options for blackout curtains. You can get ones that just kind of Velcro up. You can get travel ones. There's so many different options. So there's also just looking at how dark your room is, because sometimes people will just get the blackout curtains and still lots of light. That's what happens in my windows. Lots of light comes through the sides. Yours too, yeah. So thinking about like maybe a blackout sheet behind blackout curtains, really just trying to mitigate light as much as possible. And then early rising might be a regression. Try not to change too many things. Keep it consistent. You'll get through it. 2 weeks. And then the 4 a.m. Oh yeah, the 4 a.m. wake. People will say that their babies wake up at 4 a.m. That's almost always the temperature drop and being cold. That's what happens a lot. I see it less time in in the summertime, but in wintertime, I see a lot of 4 a.m. wakes. So making sure they're just appropriately dressed for sleep. Thinking about those sleep sacks and the tog and the long sleeve, and yeah, thinking about the PJs. And then early rising, it might be the sleep association as well. They wake up early and they want, back to that thing of they might want milk or to be rocked to sleep, right? So it might just be that. So working on changing that sleep association. And then it also can be separation anxiety. That happens a lot where they're awake and they want to see their parents, which is natural and normal. So what I recommend for separation anxiety is implementing lots of connection throughout the day, the night before. Yeah. And then, this is one thing that I didn't add, I think, to here, but toddler clocks for toddlers is awesome. It's such a cool thing. It's just a light that signals when the baby, usually around like 2.5 is when they can kind of start to understand it. It's a little clock that you can get. It's not a real clock. It's just a light. And at nighttime, it might do one color. You can program it to do one color. And then at the time that you program it to be morning time, then it will turn to a different color. So then we work on keeping baby in bed, keeping your toddler in bed. It's not for babies. Keeping toddler in bed until that light changes. And then also thinking about the color light you choose, right? Thinking about that melatonin. So maybe sometimes I see a lot of people will say, red light for night, green light for morning, and then it's red light, green light. That can be a positive association, and then that doesn't mess with the melatonin. So yeah, and then also morning light. So if you're having a lot of early risings, getting your baby out in the morning for even just a short period of time to get that light, that really helps kind of regulate that the circadian rhythm. And so that can help kind of for the next day, kind of reset that body clock. And then, yeah, sleep begets sleep. So yeah, those are like just a few of the most things that I see a lot. And then here are just my tips for routines. And yeah, thinking about the lighting in the house, that bath timing, book song stories, connection time, just making sure that, we're not on our phones and disengaging with the babies, right? Making sure that we're having that time and really meeting all of their needs before bedtime, right? And then thinking about your child when you're thinking about the routine. Some books are stimulating for babies and songs are less stimulating. So paying attention to what seems to be stimulating and calming. And then, yeah, for toddlers, providing agency opportunities, getting them involved, making a little chart is awesome so that they know what's coming in their routine, getting them involved to choose what they want for the routine. Toddlers just love to have the power. So just giving them as much power as you can will do wonders. And then I always like to throw in, this is the positive discipline, the kind and firm. It's not permissive or authoritarian. It's just about just having a kind and firm boundary. So we're not saying, oh, we're going to do 3 books tonight, and the baby says 1 more book, and then we're saying, okay, or we're saying absolutely not, authoritarian of like, no, now we're going to skip song and go right to bed. So the kind and firm balance is just having a routine, sticking to routine, and kindly and firmly keeping that consistent. Yeah, so that's just my little tips for routines. I think routines, that's the number one thing that I start with is when I work with clients is looking at the routines, and we usually are adding routines, and it's super helpful for sleep. So yeah, babies and kids and toddlers, they need to know what to expect, and these routines help them know what to expect. And then just thinking about parent self-care, we're almost done here, so we're wrapping up. But thinking about parent self-care, asking for help, and knowing what's best for your family, and really paying attention to the mental health of your family and how everyone is doing, and stepping away when you need to, which is super important. Some people think who are really against cry it out, they may be overstimulated, overwhelmed. They might be crying and they don't want to step away because they don't want to leave their baby crying. Stepping away for a moment to self-regulate is not cry it out. The most important thing for your child is for you to be regulated, right? So stepping away can be super important. And finding community, that's hard to do and important, right? And then taking breaks. I say the right way. There's no right way, but something that I see a lot is people feeling like maybe a shower is a break, or grocery shopping is a break, or going to clean the kitchen is a break. So I just love to just tell people, take the breaks where you're actually resting and relaxing, right? And it's not another part of your job or another part of another responsibility of yours. So it can be really helpful if you are overstimulated, and just going in, doing something that might help move your day along and cleaning the kitchen, but just making sure you're getting enough breaks and the things that you need. And then I just wanted to say support groups. This Postpartum Support International, PSI, is so cool. It's such a cool resource. It has lots of just free support groups online. You can find in-person ones as well, but online as well, for just so many different, they have tons. There is a lot of support for just lots of different, I'm sure you'll find whatever you need, you'll find it there, which is really cool. Okay, so that is all. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming, and yeah, and I can take some questions. Yeah. Oh, and then this is our newsletter. So I don't know actually if, will that be useful for the people online? Can they use that QR code? They can. Okay, great. I don't know how technology works. Yeah, so if you put your phone up to it, you can join our newsletter. If you click that you're interested for the infant to preschool age, that's my jurisdiction, and I send out lots of free resources and information and little blogs and charts and things about sleep. So yeah, and then that's the email to set up. I do a free 15-minute consultation, and then this is our website. So yeah, thank you so much. Okay, awesome. I'll pop on here. Oftentimes, the families I work with, their infants wake right after usually for naps, which I think is their sleep cycle. What can you recommend to try to get them that 30-minute nap? Yeah. Are you a doula or caregiver, nanny? We'll find out, but I would say, yeah, so thinking about those 30-minute, so you're totally right. That's definitely their sleep cycle, right? If they're just waking up for 30 minutes. So thinking about just their sleep associations, what they need to go to sleep, and making sure the room is dark. Oh, I think we have here. Oh, that was you. Okay, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so making sure the room is dark, the sound is good, really setting baby up for sleep. It depends on how old the infants are to you, right? So it's really developmentally appropriate for within the first 3 months for babies to wake up at 30 minutes, and that's not a problem. But if they continue that 30-minute nap and waking up, then they're not getting that restorative sleep. And so, yeah, I would just say troubleshooting with just different things like light, like sound. And I have on my on that email newsletter, I have a resource for 30-minute naps as well. It's just like it takes you more through it. It's like a little more extensive. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Feel free to unmute yourself.
Did you have any questions?
I do have a couple.
Yeah, here, while we get, I'll take your questions while we.
Dinner time.
Mhm.
So, when
Yeah, that's actually awesome. So someone here in the store just asked about dinner time and how close to bedtime that should be. So that's a great question. And I should definitely touch on that because digestion interrupts sleep, right? So not having it too close. I read a study at one point when I was in nanny that was like toddlers natural dinner time is actually like 4 p.m. which is just not doable for most people, but some people are able to do like an earlier dinner. I always recommend an earlier dinner, but you know, just as long as you have enough time to fit in that bath before 45 minutes before the start of bedtime. So if you can do like a 6 p.m. dinner, 5:30 dinner, I think that's great. Yeah. And then I heard someone on here maybe unmute. So did we have a question on here?
Yeah, sorry, I got a little notification to unmute, so I unmuted. Hello.
Hi.
So I have he just turned 3, and I have questions. I mean, I feel like I've always had a little bit of a challenge with him with sleep. Um, he sleeps with us in bed. He didn't for a little while. When I set up his toddler bed, he would sleep in his toddler bed, but then he would wake up in the middle of the night every single night. And just kind of for my own sleep, I would sometimes bring him back into our bed to sleep the rest of the night in our bed. Because it just meant that he'd fall asleep a lot quicker. And then it just turned into like I would start him in bed with us. He is climbing up the tree. He would start in bed with us, and then I would move him to his bed. But it was still the same thing. He wakes up when I'm not with him. And even with him sleeping in bed with us, if I stay out of bed too long, he will wake up looking for me and wanting me to come to bed with him. And so that is a challenge. And I also started dropping naps pretty early, just because I noticed that by skipping his nap, he was able to go to bed a lot quicker. And I lay with him to go to sleep. So I feel like I've just done a lot of things to make it fall on me a lot, which in the long run got really time consuming and more difficult for me.
Yeah, you're his sleep association. So if he wakes up and you're not there, then he's like, I need you back so I can sleep.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
So advice on that. I talked to his pediatrician and she said I can probably count on him sleeping in bed with me until he is like 5. Which I'm not too concerned. I mean, I enjoy sleeping with him. We enjoy having him sleeping with us, but the issue is like the waking up in the middle of the night and me needing to go and lay with him for him to go back to sleep. And then also now, I don't know if he is having had another sleep regression But he's getting really tired, but it's usually at like 4 p.m. And when I was giving him a nap, you know, his last time frame for a nap was usually you had to be asleep by 2. And if you go to sleep past that, then it's going to be a challenge for bed. And then now it's just also gotten to the point that even if he does do a pretty early nap, it's still a really long process to get him to go to sleep.
Do you cap the naps if he does fall asleep, or do you just let him sleep? You do cap the naps.
And his naps aren't super long anyways. Like if he does sleep, it's usually like an hour and a half. It's not even like a full 2 hour.
Yeah, that's great for that age. That's what I would recommend, an hour and a half or less.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that sounds good. That little, I'll definitely touch on, you know, if your baby or child is going to sleep with you there, that's either, you know, rocking to sleep for those at home who rock to sleep, and then you put your baby to sleep once they're actually asleep. And they wake up, they're like, where are you? It's confusing because 1 minute you're there, the next minute you're gone, right? And it's the same for toddlers as well. It's confusing. So because you are that sleep association, you are how he goes to sleep, right? So you can start implementing some other sleep associations as well to kind of do a more gradual approach. You can, you know, implement like a stuffed animal or like a little routine, something like that. There was one more thing I was going to say about that. Oh, I lost it. Yeah, I would say, if he's waking up in the middle of the night because you're not there, if you're putting him down in his own room when he falls asleep and then he wakes up and wants to be in bed with you, there's not much we can do with that other than either have him sleep in bed with you in the beginning and you're there with him, or changing his sleep association to sleep in his own room, right? Some people have a lot of success with creating a little bed on the floor and in their own room for toddlers, having kind of a little bit of a different space to kind of start that gradual transition to being in their own space. That can be super useful. And then I would say, trying to give him as much autonomy too, to be involved in his own sleep as well. So implementing a lot of things like that, like where he can kind of take charge of his sleep and isn't so dependent on you. So are you trying to move him into his own room? It sounds like sometimes you put him in his room and sometimes you put him in your room. Is that right? I think we lost you there.
Yes, sorry.
Can you hear us? Are you still there? Oh. All right, we might have lost her, but she'll come back, hopefully. Did you have another question?
So you do think you can cap naps?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That means you shorten the nap rate.
I always recommend capping naps, depending on the age, right? So newborns, you just let them sleep however much they want to sleep. But for older babies and toddlers, I would say cap the naps. You said you had a 1 and a 3 grandkid. So the 1-year-old and the 3-year-old, probably I wouldn't go past an hour and a half. Let's see. For the
1-year-old, I think has the problem with the sleep cycle because he never tends to go very long.
Oh, okay. He's not connecting the sleep cycles.
And then his sister sometimes wakes him up. There's a sound.
Yeah, the sound is so hard with the two babies. I would say, the 1-year-old is still on 2 naps a day.
Yes.
Okay, and they're shorter. They're short naps. So you could always, let's see. I would cap the nap if it goes past 2 hours, but it sounds like that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
For the 3-year-old, definitely cap the nap at hour and a half.
Right now, she hasn't really been napping unless they're in the car.
Yeah, that's her sleep association now. Yeah, and then I'd also say have her wake up before, and this is also for the younger baby too, like not having the sleep go past 4 p.m. too. So capping the nap, but also making sure it's a little bit earlier in the day. Yeah, so like maybe like a 12 to 1 p.m. nap time. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you still recommend sound machines for toddlers?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Sound machines, I just think they're great. Yeah, that's not a problem. Some people are like, oh, but then it's a sleep prop and they become dependent on it. But we usually don't have an issue having a sound machine. You can travel with it.
Yeah.
And I think that it might create a little bit of dependency if you're in a situation where you suddenly don't have power or something like that. But then we might have a phone, we're usually able to have sound machines on, right? So and they're just great. I just think that they're great for blocking out that noise. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a question on toddlers having sound machines, and I say yes. Yeah. Do you have any other questions? Yeah. Okay, great. Do we have any questions from our online friends? What's that? Oh, you shared evidence-based using both babies and parents. Oh, that's so sweet. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. So here, I'll share this again for anybody who wants to find me. Oh, yeah. This is how you can find me. And that newsletter, again, has lots of free resources. And that's sent out weekly, too. So free little tips and tricks every week. All right. Thank you so much.